This panel is titled Approaches to Preservation Across Kurdistan. The moderator of this panel is Dr. Bəhrۆz چەمەنئارا. Dr. Bəhrۆz is a scholar specializing in Kurdish epic literature and archival studies. He holds a PhD in Iranian studies from University of Göttingen and serves as an assistant professor in the Department of Kurdish Language and Literature at the University of Kurdistan in Sanandaj. Çəmənئára's research focuses on the Gorani literary tradition. Thank you, Dr. Bəhrۆz. I would like to welcome you to stage and all of our wonderful panelists.
Good morning, everybody. Salatan Lebet, Zorzor Bakheraten. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm excited, really. My name is Bəhrۆz, as Shana said, and I have the honor of moderating this incredible panel. You know, it's a large panel. So I wanted to give some information about the panel, but since the time is narrow, I just, as a notice, give you some point about the rules of panel. We have only 75 minutes time. It means each panelist have about 8 minutes. We will be tolerated for 1 minute plus minutes. And after that, we will have a short Q&A in Kurdish and English. So let me, without further delay, go to the first panelist is Hōzan Məhmúud. Hōzan is a Kurdish feminist writer, public lecturer, activist, and the co-founder of Culture Project, a platform dedicated to feminism, art, and gender in Kurdistan and its diasporas. She is the winner of the Emma Humphrey Prize in 2016 and the editor of the Kurdish Women's Stories in 2021. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Please.
Thank you. It is a real pleasure to be here among such thoughtful and engaged minds. I would like to thank Kashkol for the generous invitation and for the opportunity to share my work with you today. I'm also sincerely grateful to the warm hospitality and, of course, for the delicious Kurdish food and sweets. While Kashkol is known for its amazing academic contributions, you are equally remarkable hosts. I have truly felt the spirit of Kurdish hospitality. So thank you, Kashkolians and non-Kashkolians, for making this conference so far a great success. Thank you. In my presentation today, I will focus on the work of Culture Project, and I explore how, in the absence of formal archival infrastructure, our cultural and community-based initiative gradually assumed an archival function partially. Over time, this work has come to serve as a significant foundation for our ongoing collaborative research with Dr. Izábél Kajsa, who will elaborate further on this aspect of in her presentation. When we speak about archives, we must move beyond viewing them solely as a physical or storage spaces. Archives are also sites of power, control, memory, and identity. Historically, they have been closely associated with government-controlled institutions, religious authorities, and academic libraries. This is why archiving is intrinsically political. It raises essential questions about who is documented, archived, and remembered, how, where, and by whom. These are fundamental inquiries when we critically examine the role of archives. For Kurds and Kurdistanis, people without a state, archives and archiving is heavily political, complex, and often problematic. Much of our history has been distorted, erased, or reshaped to fit colonial agendas. While we may not be able to fully reclaim our lost, manipulated past, we can act in the present. We can continue to archive as we live and expand the ways we archive to include those who have been sidelined or erased. In my experience of studying Kurdish history, dominant narratives often highlight male heroism and occasionally a few select women from the ruling classes. This is far from enough to represent the lives and stories of millions of Kurdish men and women. I have always been aware of how recognition often depends not on who you are, but on who you know, connections. Some women may be given visibility or occupy prominent positions historically up to now, but this does not necessarily translate into meaningful progress for broader women's rights and struggles. Meanwhile, countless Kurdish women who contribute their lives, knowledge, skills, and creativity to our society are excluded from official narratives, left out by those who control what is archived, remembered, and celebrated. This is why I believe it is vital to embrace alternative ways of remembering women and writing them back into our history. It is an urgent and necessary task. As Kurdish scholar Dila Derek once said, the Kurdish struggle has been waged not only through arms, but through the preservation of language, song, and memory, all of which form a kind of people's archive carried from one village to village, prison to prison, exile to exile. At some point in my life, I felt there was a pressing need to document, highlight, and write about our fragmented lives, especially those of us who have endured multiple wars, dictatorships, exiles, imprisonment, sanctions, and displacement. It is only through the creation of alternative forms of archiving and remembering and writing people back and celebrating the lives and legacies of Kurdish women, particularly in cultural production and politics, can be preserved, celebrated, and reintegrated into the broader Kurdish history, which has been predominantly male-dominated. In 2016, together with Ismail Hamalau and Miran Abraham, I co-founded the UK-based Culture Project. We recognized the need for a platform that would both connect Kurdistan to its diaspora and beyond, and introduced alternative modes of writing about art, literature, and culture more broadly. Through this initiative, we have provided space for Kurdish artists, feminists, poets, and writers to gain visibility and have their work highlighted. Shortly after, the Culture Project became a trusted and reliable digital magazine, publishing in both English and Kurdish, serving aspiring writers as well as established figures from the older generation. To showcase the diverse richness of Kurdish culture and the invaluable contributions of women to cultural production and artistic creation, we launched feminist art reviews, translated poetry into English, published short stories, and developed research collaborations, notably with Dr. Kaiza. In addition, I ran a feminist school online during Corona. More than 150 women attended the lectures about various feminist theories, struggles, and schools of thought around the world. These efforts have not only preserved knowledge, but also actively created archives allowing us to unearth influential women whose contribution to the cultural scene have often been overlooked or insignificantly recognized. In 2019, I launched the Self-Writing Project for Kurdish women, through which 25 Kurdish women from all parts of occupied Kurdistan shared their personal stories, covering topics such as politics, imprisonment, gender-based violence, art making, and the loss of loved ones. This work culminated in a book titled Kurdish Women's Stories, published in both Kurdish and English by Pluto Press in London and the University of Alberta Press in Canada. The book received international attention for offering a rare opportunity to read first-hand accounts of Kurdish women speaking and writing about their own lived experiences, as a continuation of Kurdish women's stories, now in collaboration with my two US-based Bakuri friends, Rukin Isik and Berivan Serikaya, we have curated a new collection of prison stories, women political prisons from all 4 parts of Kurdistan who have written their own struggle in prison, and hopefully it will be published soon in Kurdish Sorani in Kurdistan and English abroad. This collection, to me, when I read it, it was the stories and the archive of trauma and healing. We have also translated a novella by Kurdish female writer Ahlam Mansour, an almost forgotten writer and political activist from the 80s and 70s, so we translated it into English. Likewise, we translated Sarah's Homeland, a historical novel by Miran Abraham that, for the first time in Kurdish literary history, explores the lives of the Jewish people in this region.
Hōzan, I'm sorry, if you could wrap up this.
So we have been basically doing a lot of art, archiving, and writing about women's legacies in art and so on, but also a very important project was with the British Museum led by Renas Babakar. She's a graduate of the American University, which was about documenting the felt making in the foothills of Zagros Mountain. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, as a people without a state, with a history that has been distorted and in many parts erased, if we cannot rebuild the past, we must preserve the present and the future. This is why I believe in embracing diverse forms of archiving, and I will leave the floor for my friend Izábél, who will speak more in detail about collaboration in research. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much for your insightful contribution. So let us turn to Izábél. Dr. Izábél Kéza is a senior researcher and SNSF Ambition Fellow at the Institute of Social Anthropology, University of Bern in Switzerland. Together with Hōzan, she led the research project, the Kurdish region post-ISIS, youth, art, and gender. She is the author of the book, The Kurdish Women's Freedom Movement, Gender, Body, Politics, and Militant Femininities. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much. Is this on? Can you hear me okay? All right. Also, a heartfelt thanks from my side to everyone who is here and to everyone who is making this gathering so special. I would like to take the 8 minutes that I have to talk about the collaboration that I've done together with Hōzan, but also to show you some images of the work of the wonderful artists that we worked with for this paper that was published by the LSE Middle East Center paper series, and that was also translated into Sorani thanks to the wonderful work of Nabas Samad. So I was a fellow at the LSE in 2020 when I had the chance to apply for a research grant, and I had just finished my work on the Kurdish women's freedom movement, so the women's movement of the PKK, and I wanted to do something different. I called up my friend Hōzan, I said, what should we do? And she said, let's work on this amazing new generation of young artists that I've seen emerge after 2014. And it was really her idea to give space to a group of young activists and artists. Some of them call themselves feminists, others don't. We know this term has a difficult standing in this region. To do things otherwise, to problematize really difficult topics. As you said, this is a forum where we can do this, and so I will speak also, or I will talk about these difficult issues that had been picked up, such as who controls which body, who is able to exist safely and freely, what are some of the conservative norms around gender and sexuality that can and are being challenged. And so yeah, we really looked at this so-called post, and I'm using quotation mark here, post-ISIS Iraqi Kurdistan, and looked at the different ways that art had started to be produced, the topics that had been picked up, and the spaces that had been had been created for this kind of art making. Because as we know, as you just said, who gets picked up by the big funders like Goethe Institute and the French Institute, or who gets funding from one of the dominant parties is always political, but there are a new generation of artists that are unaffiliated, but that still try to make their voices and their visions heard. And it's important to say that while doing this work, we could hardly rely on any archives, because as Hōzan just said, there aren't any that have the preservation of women's art at their core. And those we worked with were not benefiting from the clout given to them by international donors or party affiliations, and were operating on the fringes with much less visibility and outward and upward mobility. And we know that in post-conflict or post-invasion contexts, winning over hearts and minds of the imperial powers often works through art, empowering women through art. But what kind of art and what kind of women gain that kind of visibility and mobility is a question that we were critically looking at. So we interviewed 48 young artists and activists between 2021 and 23 in Erbil, Suli, and Duhok. As I said, these were people we were interested in, not just for their artistic practice, but also for their political voice. These were people who spoke about patriarchal control, conservatism, environmental destruction, and body politics. During our interviews, we became acutely aware of some of the challenges of being an aspiring artist, from accessing education, being able to paint and exhibit what they wanted and they deemed crucial, to a lack of funding, gallery and exhibition spaces, to the broader uphill battle against gender-based violence, harassment, and the negative connotation people have with the term feminism. I know Suli is a bit of an exception. I know where I'm speaking at and from, this being an artistic and cultural hub, but these were some of the prevailing sentiments that we encountered. So in terms of what we saw and what this report then is also about, we grouped what we saw into 5 topics. This does, of course, not do justice to the breadth of work that is being produced, but it helped us think about themes and to contextualize these themes. So they were, first, violence, trauma, and isolation. Second, women's solitude, or women reclaiming time and space. Thirdly, intimacy with the self, but also between friends and lovers. Reimagining Kurdistan folklore, and body politics. And I'm just going to show you some of these images. This would be the first group, so on violence, trauma, and isolation. We saw countless images of women curled up in darkness, silenced, muted, groped, stumbling over the social obstacles that are being put in their way. These are examples of solitude and reclaiming space. That was apparent to us. We read this as an expression of women claiming time and individuality within a society that very much upholds the importance and centrality of the extended family. Some women are gazing into the distance, others are smoking and drinking by themselves, or resting with a friend. I chose these images on intimacy. Pairs were frequently depicted gently leaning on each other, resting on each other's lap, perhaps illustrating what intimacy does look like to them or could look like to them, away from society's norms around honor or shame or violence and domination. There were wonderful images that we saw on the Kurdish folklore with a twist, young artists using illustration, digital art, collage, often again centering women, sort of also speaking back or trying to unearth a time when life was more collective and women were perhaps more at the heart of this collective life. And then the issue of body politics, which is of course woven through everything, which is, again, this question of who controls which body with what kind of ideology. And how are individuals bound to larger structures of nationalism, imperialism, religious conservatism, and neoliberalism. And just to also speak about a specific example that really spoke to us was this Sersemin exhibition here in Suleymaniye, where a young collective of independent curators and artists put together this exhibition, which sadly I didn't see. I only saw the images of it. Yeah, and I chose this one image also because artists are also problematizing prevailing beauty standards. So, just to summarize, we read these works as a form of complaint against different forms of domination, but also a form of archiving and a form of refusal. A refusal to be controlled, to be dominated by prevailing beauty standards, but also a refusal to have their bodies marked as sites of honor or shame. We found that this younger generation is increasingly pushing back against these conservative gender norms and relations, and instead imagines a Kurdistan otherwise. Otherwise here as a way of resisting colonial and patriarchal logics, but also to develop new visions as the old orders are dying. Am I good in time?
Yes.
Should I end here? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And just as a final note, because I see I have this slide.
Please.
So in this essay, we summarize some of our main findings. If you're keen, you can check it out. It's very short and concise. Thank you.
You're welcome. Vielen Dank. So let's move on to the left wing. The next panelist is Kashii, an internationally recognized photojournalist, filmmaker, speaker, and educator. A contributing photographer to the Seventh Foundation and co-founder of Talking Eyes Media, Kashii is recognized for his complex and compelling rendering of the human condition. In addition to numerous awards from World Press Photo and Pictures of the Year International, including a 2015 Multimedia Photographer of the Year Award, his images have been published and exhibited worldwide.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. So, as an American photojournalist, with a twist, because my parents were born in Baghdad and raised in Baghdad, I was born in New York. And anyway, when I learned about the Kurds in, of all places, Northern Ireland, in a project I was working on, I was immediately taken as a journalist by this idea of the largest ethnic group in the world without a nation of their own. And that was 1990. And since then, I have worked on and off coming to Kurdistan. I think this is my 8th time in the last 30 some odd years. But the majority of my work was done in 1991 under an assignment for National Geographic magazine, and eventually published a book, When the Borders Bleed, The Struggle of the Kurds, with the great writer Christopher Hitchens, who unfortunately passed way too early. So I want to talk a little bit about archiving and the importance of archiving. And I don't know, there might be a few images as well. But early on in my career as a photographer, I realized the importance of an archive. And 45 years later, I view it almost like a garden, something that you need to weed, something you need to water and nourish. And then if you take care of it, you can harvest from it. And I really see my archive and any archive really in that way. And so last year, I donated my archives to the Briscoe Center for American Studies at the University of Texas in Austin, one of the great photographic, not just photographic archives, but in the United States and possibly the world. So that means my Kurdish work is safe there. And one of the many great things about an archive that is intact, and by intact I mean, and I will speak specifically from a photographic point of view, but I think it pertains to any objects that we want to archive, is the metadata. We're living in the digital age, and it's so important that you have the proper metadata. One thing that I've found interesting in this time span is, when I was doing this work in the early 90s and it was published in magazines, it was, news photography. And then 10 or 15 years later, people would come back to me for historical pictures, and I was still a young man, and I thought, wow, that's really weird. It's almost unsettling that my images already are historical. Well, now at this age and stage, I really appreciate what that means. That I have had the privilege to create work that might be considered historical and become part of this vast lexicon of, multiple archives throughout the world about specifically the Kurdish people, the Kurdish cause. So besides metadata, it's important to be organized. So the nomenclature, the way you name individual objects, just having a structure. Well, I argue with my wife, who's really the gardener in the family, and she likes these sort of wild gardens, and I like things very structured and organized. But anyway, I think, for me, when we're archiving objects, things, also ephemera. When I was working in Kurdistan, throughout my life, I've kept journals. They used to be physical journals that I'd go to like a local bookshop wherever I was and find a journal, and it was usually writing almost every night to my wife about what I was experiencing, the amazing things I saw, my emotional reactions, my political reactions. And then in some sad way, it became nightly emails and, with the digital age. But anyway, so this idea of ephemera is so important, particularly, I think, for a lot of the other folks on the stage here who are collecting objects and, three-dimensional art and books and so forth. So anyway, so some of the images that I'm showing, this is in Afrin in Syria. Whoop, they're going fast. This is actually in, this is going too fast. So, for me, I grew up as an American kid in New York, and the Kurds actually brought me to my heritage and to my homeland of Iraq. And, it was something I rejected growing up in the 1960s and 70s. My parents were much older than me. Just to give an idea, my father worked for the British Mandate government in Iraq in the 1920s and 30s. And to think that his son, I was born in 1957 in New York, then came back, in 2003 with American forces in the invasion, it's sort of, for me, it's a bit incredible, this sort of period of time that my family sort of has had a connection to Iraq and thankfully continues to have that connection. But so for me, the Kurds are important on a personal level because, as I said, they brought me to learn a bit about the place that my people come from, but also it energized what I call the sort of advocacy journalist part of me, which over the preceding generations, decades has only grown. And that when I say advocacy work, this is this idea that you create media materials that might serve the media in the short and medium term, but they're long-lasting and they're timeless. And that, to me, is my goal. And more than that, and specific to the Kurdish cause, is that this work can be used to not just illuminate people about who the Kurds are, because so much of the world is ignorant, as many of you well know, of who the Kurds are, but they become educational tools. And in some cases, they become tools for advocacy. So, thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ed. So now it turns to be the time for the middle block, which is John Boułek, an assistant professor of ethnomusicology at the University of Notre Dame. His work focuses on Kurdish music and media, especially in Kurdistan of Iraq. He is currently working on a book project that explores the role of music in Kurdish radio broadcasting. Please, John.
Thank you. Beyanatan bash, slautan lebet, berasti, qza Kurdin, bezmani Kurdi, هێشتا بۆ من ئاسان نییە بەڵام بۆ من گرنگە بە کوردی بڵێم زۆر سپاس بۆ زانکۆی ئەمریکی و کەشکۆڵ و خۆبەخشەکان و خوێندکاران و هەمووتان. Thank you all. It's a really great pleasure to be here today. I've been studying Kurdish music for the last 10 years, which is not enough time. I need a whole lifetime. There's much more to learn. But I was coming here and thinking about being with you all today. It made me think of a time early on in that period in the year 2018. I went to one of my first Kurdish studies events. It was a Kurdish studies summer school in Paris, and I was so excited to be there. And I met a prominent scholar in one of the coffee breaks, who's now a very dear friend. And the first thing she said to me was, "Did you say you study music?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Why are you here?" And so to think, to think about what that means in relation to archives, one of the things I've been saying again and again to students as I'm here, so apologies for those of you hearing this again, we often think of music as an object. Notes on a page, a CD, a cassette, a record, an instrument. And I think that my friend in 2018, this is what she was thinking. We're not here to talk about CDs, we're not here to talk about notes, we're not here to talk about maqams. But it's important to remember, and as an ethnomusicologist, very central to my work, to share that music is not just an object. Music is an activity. Music is not just a noun, music is a verb. And so when we think about music and studying music and music archives, I'm not just thinking about those shelves of CDs, those shelves of, the instruments that are in the collections. Those are very important, of course. But it also matters what local histories inform music making. People's economic conditions matter. The political situation matters. The history matters. So I wanted to say that first because it really frames how I think about music archives. And this also broadens the kinds of study we can make with music. I'll also say that some of what I had planned to say today connects really nicely with what some others have talked about in terms of building personal relationships and friendships and questions about language and questions about colonialism and decolonialism. So I won't spend so much time on those aspects, but of course, if there are questions in the Q&A, I'm happy to return to those themes. So in the few minutes I have, I want to sort of talk about first the kinds of archives that are available for music research. And then I'll mention a few challenges of studying music in archives, and then I'll end by discussing just a few opportunities I think that we have at the present moment. And I will say that I am so heartened and very happy about the sheer number of music archives that have become available even in the last 10 years. So first, what kinds of archives are there? Well, we know, of course, that your great city, Slimani, has some fantastic independent archives like the Kurdish Heritage Institute. Thank you all again. They've been so helpful to me personally. Also, of course, Jin Archive, Binke Jin, and archives like these, of course, are very, very important. There are also a number of archives across the world that are not sort of independent in the sense that KHI and Jin are, but they're connected to either cultural centers or universities. So these include archives like, the archive, the Omar Sheikh Mus archive at the University of Exeter, the archives of cultural centers in Berlin and in Paris, et cetera. Now it's possible to talk also about online archives. And of course, many of these individual archives are working to digitize some of their collections, but there are also some archives that are pretty much exclusively online. So we can think about the Digital Archive of the Middle East and the Kurdish Archive, again at University of Exeter. Also here in Hawler, we have now the KCAC, Kurdistan Center for Arts and Culture Archive, which is digital and has amazing resources. So there are online archives also that are now available for research. Next are, of course, as many others have mentioned, private archives. And for music, there are many, many, many of these across Kurdistan and across the world. These are fantastic archives. They can also be some of the more challenging ones to access and to fund, and I'll discuss those in a moment. And then finally, again, encouraging us to think very broadly about music and music making, there are, of course, also archives of which music making and or Kurds in Kurdistan are just one part of a much larger set of resources. So, for example, at the British National Archive, of course, given the history of British colonial intervention in the region, there are many, many archival materials about Kurds in Kurdistan. Historically, this can also be challenging, especially when there's materials that are organized along a nation-state basis, or even, for example, I remember once finding some Kurdish archives in the Berlin Phonogram Archive, and I had missed them at first because they didn't say anything about Kurds or Kurdistan, they said Mesopotamia. So historically, that can be a little bit of a challenge as well. So again, the kinds of archives available for research are, there's an immense variety, and there are many, many directions scholars of music can go. So what are some of the challenges? Probably, again, don't need to spend a lot of time talking about this because each of us who work in archives know the challenges by heart. But of course, funding. Funding is difficult for sustaining archives, for being able to travel to archives, especially when they're scattered all across the world. To get some of those private archives in good shape materially, physically, it costs money, and this is an ongoing challenge. There are also a set of challenges associated with language. So for me, as a non-native Kurdish speaker, I was several years into my research before I could find someone who could teach me Kurdish. This is still a big problem on the global scale. We need more Kurdish language instruction. But also related to language, there's the ongoing standardization between the different dialects of Kurdish. And you know, for example, if you drive around the city, you see lots and lots of the names of businesses that are transliterated into the Latin alphabet, but they're not transliterated in such a way that honors the one-to-one correspondence that exists between Sorani and Kurmanji. This, of course, has come from Kurds themselves, and the Library of Congress in the United States has adopted this system of transliteration. How does this relate to archives? Well, when Sorani materials are listed in the Latin alphabet, if you don't know exactly how they're transliterated and the spellings vary from one place to another, it can be very difficult to find these materials. So this, I know, is a very specific concern, but this can be a problem for archival research. And then, of course, there's the fact that archives about Kurds in Kurdistan exist in many languages other than Kurdish. So even if you know all the Kurdish dialects, to have a complete picture, you in some way need to access archives that are in Arabic and Turkish and Persian and Russian and English and French and German, all these different languages, of course. And I don't know many people, I certainly am not one of them, who knows all of these languages. So this is a challenge. Another challenge has to do with copyright. And we often think about copyright as a legal issue, and of course there's certainly that side of it, but it's also, of course, an ethical concern. We want to make sure that people are receiving the recognition for their work, but of course this gets challenging really quickly, especially when you're dealing with things like folk materials, right? Who gets to have copyright for a musical tradition that's been passed down for generations? That's a very important question. And also we know, of course, that copyright has been used as a weapon in many cases against Kurdish traditions. In Turkey especially, there have been those that have claimed copyright for Kurdish materials, which actually keeps them from being available for research. I'll mention again, there's a set of concerns that I won't talk about here, but that have to do with the colonial logics, I call them, which are those ways of thinking that even when colonialism is nominally over, we actually can sometimes keep those same processes going in terms of epistemologies. And of course, archives, as we've already heard, are inherently related to power. And then the last sort of challenge that I'll mention has to do with the lack or inability of sometimes sharing. Sometimes it's hard to know which archives have what, right? So it's important to build the connections as we move forward. So finally, how much time?
It's almost done.
Okay. I'll very quickly give just a few things that I think are opportunities for us moving forward. The first of these, and I want to point to the work of anthropologist Marlene Schaefers in this regard. She has written some fantastic work about expanding the way we think about archives. And actually, one of my favorite things to do in Kurdistan is when I meet new friends, I say, you know, show me your YouTube playlist, right? That's an archive. That's a personal archive. Show me your YouTube kashkol, right, of music. And so we have to continue expanding the ways we think about archives as a way of unsettling those power imbalances that have risen up over time. A second recommendation is that, again, especially for scholars of music, we continue to widen the areas in which we look for materials related to music. Again, we can't just be happy to look for scores and cassettes. We have to really broaden the ways we think about music as a part of people's lives. And also, I think it's important to continue researching widely. right? It's really easy and really tempting to get so excited about one particular idea or project that we narrow our focus and we don't know what anyone else is doing and we don't know how to communicate with them. But we have to continue building these relationships because no one of us can do it all. That relates to my third suggestion, which is that, again, we continue to foster personal connections. We heard this morning about how important this is about discovering archives and many other areas. And finally, again, I'll just say very quickly, we have to continue to be invested in the process of decolonization in terms of archives and power and epistemologies and the way we sometimes value written histories over oral histories. And I can say more in the Q&A if people are interested about how I've approached this in my own work. But again, I'll stop here for sake of time and thank you all again. It's been a real pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you, John, for sharing your thoughts and the challenges of music with us. So the next panelist is Dr. Osman Ahmed, a Kurdish artist whose work focuses on memory, trauma, and the testimony. He earned his PhD from the University of Arts, London, with a pioneering project on documenting the Kurdish genocide, Anfal, through drawing. His works have been exhibited across the Middle East and Europe, including major shows at the Imperial War Museum and the British Museum. And in 2017, he received the IAGS Artist Prize in Australia. Floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you for American University Kashkol team, especially Shane and Pesha for inviting me and having me here. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you to stay until now. We are at the end of nearly our panels, which is my talks maybe include all of the talks we've been had few days about literature, poems, music, art, everything. But that project which I'm talking about, I think they will clear all of these things, all take it away. It's ethnic cleansing, masculine, which is will take all over. And if you are not be careful, not learning from the history, that's going to happen and happen and happen, which is now we are in, and is like a model now all around the world. So I'm not going to deeply, I'm not a historical or psychological to talk about that. Really, you all know about that more than me. But I'm a witness, I'm an artist, and I witnessed mass killing in 1988, where I was in the mountain. I took the mountain refugees with a few freedom fighters, Peshmerga, and I have to mention, which is Hamajaza is a great singers with me at that time. We saw a lot of burning villages, taking people away from their lands. They're all civilian. They're all civilians. We had nothing, just ourselves. We had an FM at that time. We listened to that radios, Monte Carlo, London, Cairo, Damascus, Tehran. Anything can talk about this crime because the army is too great with Jash and Jaish. Everything came to civilians, villages, farmers, and village by village they came to take it away. So no one talk about it. No Islam world, no Arab world, no left, no right. I wish at that time that something's happened, disaster, to make a change, but it wasn't. So I told myself as an artist, if I survive, I will tell people about these stories and make my life to continue doing it to those people who never hear about it or not seen it. I made when I had a chance in Britain, I made my memory on my MA through drawing. And I had good recognition through the Institute of Art and galleries and museums like Tate Gallery and National Gallery to respond to my work. That gave me a power to explore more, to learn more, to try to more understanding of how I can document, how I can link my work to worldwide. So my work, with a few of my friends' memory, it's not just give me full information about what's happened. To make a national memory, I needed to go back and talk to those people who survived from the camps. I did that. After I finished my MA, straight away, I researched and go through, and I got good support from London University of Art, because I recognized that the subject is quite a humanity matter. And they give me all options to make these things happen. Link me with the archive, with the other artists who are doing similar works, and I try to be myself, to not get any copies, just try to be originality of my works, but learn from others. Through those kinds of practice and work, I made interviews, 27 survivors. I chosen 15 of them and drawing their testimonies. Because we don't know what happened to them, where they taken away from the machinery, military machinery, and the other vessels they took to South Iraq. How were they talking about a lot of these sample of 3 of the survivors. One of them is passed away 3 years ago. So it came through a lot of nightmare stories, which is no one knows. And it's quite important to our nation, to people, to new generation, to the world, to see what happened in that particular time where no one talked about it. We know in Halabja, so many journalists came around there because Iran, they want to reason it for himself. But in Iraq, in Kurdistan, all the world, they know what happened, but it's done after the umbrella of the Bassis, by the name of God. They made that kind of criminal. So the images came up with so many of them. Hundred of these images came where these pupils, they ran away from their villages, they went to the mountain, then by copters, they're following them, and Josh came in all around them and take them to south of Iraq. Then they put them in the Nugra Salman, the Ar, and other camps, which is they made specially for them to not to live, to die. I just, because limit time, I just chose a few slides, but if I took any one of these stories, they are all on storyboard. It takes so long to talk for anyone to a particular image. But in here, I tried to bring attention for all of you, which is came to one criminal, which is about 2 months ago, they found it by survivors. They noticed it as Ajaj. Ajaj, one of the, I don't know how he's still alive now, and you didn't know. He's taking his own normal life. That's Ajaj. He is kind of people that he never had any feeling and tried to kill people, just killing them. He was there just killing them. You see once just the images over there. in one night, he wake up because one the kids crying. It came to them, found it, which is a pregnant woman lay down, and they have the kids, smaller one, crying. He put his feet on the stomach, on the pregnant woman, until they die.
1 minute, please.
1 minute?
Yeah.
Okay. So like I say, you cannot talk about genocide in 8 minutes, especially in these particular times, but I want to see all of this. When I have done all of these things, I came to the question, which is in the beginning was, with my survivors or tutors, with the other criticals, can I document genocide through drawing, crime against humanity through drawings? I can say now, yes, we did. And I can show you some recognition from the most important places around the world, which is Imperial War Museum. Vision of War will take part of the drawings as the massive and the great documentation the world, which is we take a recognition by the museums and the recognized institute around the world, especially in Britain. In this book, for the people who are interested in documentation and research about the art, it's very important drawing investigation. It's academic, it's very, very powerful, and talk about the relation between graphic and documentation through the history. It came from Da Vinci to now, and they bring the contemporary art, how the human being tells their stories through drawing by now in their way. And they light on my work and my project deeply.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We are behind the plan. And the last but not the least is the youngest panelist. And since گەشتیار کاوە will speak in Kurdish, I will introduce him in Kurdish as well. گەشتیار لەدایک بووی ساڵی 1997 لە شاری سلێمانی، ژانیاری ئامێری ستارە و گۆرانی بێژە، هەروەها خوێندکاری ماستەری زمانەوانی گشتیە لە زانکۆی فرایبورگ لە ئەڵمان، کارەکانی لە شێوەی کاری مۆدرنە لەگەڵ تێکەڵاوکردنیان لەگەڵ مەقاماتی کوردی و هۆنەری کلاسیکی کوردی.
زۆر سپاس.
فەرموون.
زۆر سپاس بە خێراتنی هەموو لایەکەکەم، زۆر سپاس کە ئامادە بوون و سپاس بۆ ئەم دەرفەتە، سپاس بۆ ماندووبوونی هەموو ئەوانەی لەم پانێڵەیە بەشدار بوون. بۆ ئەمڕۆ حەزەکەم تیژ بخێنە سەر بابەتێک بە ناونیشانی مەقامی بەیادۆریان. ڕەنگە من کەمێک زیاتر پشت ببەستم بە وشە لەبەروی کە ئەم بابەتە بە پشتبەستن بە لێکۆڵینەوەیە کە کردومە لەسەر ئەم مەقامە نووسیومەتەوە، بۆی ڕەنگە کەمێک تەکنیکەڵتر بێ. سپاستانەکەم. ئەوەی کە گرنگە بیزانی هەر کلتورێک شێواز و سیستمێکی خۆی هەیە بۆ مۆسیقا، بە هەر شێوازی خۆی پەری پێداوە، بەڵام ئەوەی کە ئیزانین وڕوونە لای هەمومان لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاستە، لە بەشێک لە ئاسیای ناوەڕاستە مەقام ڕۆڵێکی سەرەکی هەیە لە میلۆدی و دەربڕین و لە دەربڕینی هەستەکانە، هەروەها لە ڕێگەی مەقامەوە ئێمە توانیمانە کە ناسنامەی نەتەوەی خۆمان وەکو میوزیک دەرببڕین. تابانەوەی کە مەقام جێ ئەکاتەوە لە پەیژە ئەوەیە کە مەقام کۆمەڵە یاسای خۆی هەیە و یاساکانیش بریتیە لە جوڵەی نۆتەکان، جەختکردنەوە لەسەر نۆتە دیاریکراوەکان و هەروەها بریتیە لە گەشەسەندنی میلۆدیەکان. ئەمەش پێ وترێ ڕێڕەوی میلۆدی یان سەیر لە زمانی عەرەبیە. بۆیە منیش بەڕاستی کارم کردووە لەسەر مەقامێکی نوێ. ئەو مەقامە بە تێکەڵکردنی دوو سیستمی جیاوازە. کە زیاتر دواتر ڕوون یەکەمەوە. ئەم مقامە ناوی بەیاد دۆریانە. بەیاد دۆریان بریتیە لە تێکەڵکردنی مقامی بەیاد لەگەڵ مۆدی دۆریانی ڕۆژئاوایی کە یەکێکە لە مۆدەکانی سەردەمی یۆنانیەکان و زۆربەی فەیلسوفەکان قسەیان لەسەر کردووە بەتایبەت ئەرستۆ ئەفلاتون باسییان لەوە کردووە کە لە ڕووی ئەخلاقی و مقامە مۆدی دۆریان چۆنە. بۆیە من هاتووم نیوەی مۆدی دۆریان لەگەڵ مقامی بەیاتە تێکەڵم کردو و ڕەنگێکی نوێی دروست کردووە بۆ مقامی کوردی. پرسیارەکەوەی ئایا مقامە پێشتر بوونی هەبووە؟ من لە دوایەوەی کە زۆر گەڕام بە وڵاتانی دراوسەیە لە ڕووی ئەرشیفەکانیانەوە مقام طبعا سەردەمی عوسمانیەکان نزیکەی 400 مقام لەو ناوچانەی کە لەژێر کۆنتڕۆڵی ئەوان بوون کۆکراوەتەوە کە بەشێکی مقاماتی ئێمەشی تایە. لەو 400 مقامە من نەمتوانی لە ڕووی دەنگیەوە یان هەر ئەوەی کە تۆمار کراوە بتوانم بیدۆزمەوە. هەروەها دوای ئەوەی کە سیستمی مۆسیقای عەرەبی مقاماتی عەرەبی گەڕام نەمتوانی ئەم مقامە بدۆزمەوە. هەروەها ڕەدیفی فارسیش بە هەمان شێوە نەمتوانی کە ئەم پێک هاتەیە بدۆزمەوە لە مقامی هیچ یەکێک لەوانە. بۆیە توانین بڵێن کە یەکەم جارە لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاستە کە ئەم بەم جۆرە کار لەسەر ئەم مقامە بکرێ. بەڵامی تر ئەمە بەو مانایە نییە کە ئەمە داهێنانێک بێت 100% بێت چکە وەکو پێشتر ئاماژم پێەیە ئەمە لێکدانی دوو کولتوری مۆسیقایی جیاوازە تێکەڵکردنە و بەم لێکدانەش بۆتەوەی کە ڕەنگێکی نوێ دروست بکەین. بۆیە توانین کە بڵین ئەمە ئەندامێکی نوێیە، ئەندامێکی نوێ بۆ خێزانی مقامی بەیاد وەکو وەزانین کە مقامی بەیاد کۆمەڵێک لقیکەی لێبێتەوە وەکو مقامی ئورفا حوسەینی یان بەیاد شووری یان قارجەغار کە پێم وایە هەردووکی یەکشتن لەگەڵ مقامی نەفەت. ئەمانە کۆمەڵە نمونەن کە ئەمانیش ئەندامێکن لە خێزانی بەیاد و ناسنامە و شێوازی ژەندن و چڕینی خۆیان هەیە. ڕەنگە لێرە کەمێک تەکنیکەڵ بین، هیوادارم بە جۆرێک ڕوونی بکەمەوە کە هەمومان تێبگەینەوانی کە لە بواری میوزیکیا کاریان نەکردووە. مقامی بەیاد دۆریان پێک دێ لە دوو ڕەگەز وەکو ئەبینین ڕەگەزی بەیاد لەگەڵ پێنجینەی سەروی مۆدی دۆریان کە پێوتە تێتراکۆرد. ئەگەر ئێمە بەراوردی بکەین بە مقامی بەیاد ئەبینین لە تۆنی شەشەمە تۆنی شەشەمی ئەبێتە مەیجەر. بەڵام حەزەکەم کە لەسەر پەیژەکەی نمونەیەکم ئامادە کردووە ئەگەر دەنگی یەکەممان گوێ لێ بێت بە سپاسەوە. ئەگەر بەراوردی بکەین بە مقامی بەیاد دەنگی دووەم سپاس. وەکووە بینین کە هیچ گۆڕانکاریەک لە بەرزبوونەوە و نزمبوونەوەی ئەم مقامایە ڕووی نایە وەکو مقامی بەیاد، ینی هەروەکو خۆی ئەمێنێتەوە. ئەوە یەکێکە لە خاسیەتەکانی. ببوورە یەکێک لە تایبەتمەندیەکان ینی کۆمەڵێک تایبەتمەندی هەیە ئەم مقامە. یەکێک لە تایبەتمەندیەکانی ئەوەیە کە وەکو ئاماژەم پێەیە تۆنی شەشەمی لە باتی ئەوەی کە ماینەر بێ مەیجەرە، واتە کەمێک دڵخۆشتر و ئەتوانین بڵێن گەشاوی پێوە دیارە بە بەراورد بە ینی کەمتر خەمبارە. وەکو ئاماژەشم پێیا پێشتر لە ئەسێندینگ دیسێندینگ واتە بەرزبوونەوەی مەقامەکە و نزمبوونەوەی مەقامەکە وەکو خۆی ئەمێنێتەوە گۆڕانکاری بەسەر نایەت. و یەکێک لە خاسیەتە گرنگەکانی ئەم مقامە ئەوەیە هاوشێوەی مقامی حوسەینی لە تۆنی پێنجەمەوە دەست پێکات، واتە دەستپێکەکەی لە ناوەڕاستی مەقامەکەوەیە، دواتر یەتەوە سەر مەقامی ئەتوانین بڵێن ڕەگەزی بەیاد. وەکو وەزانی کە لە مەقاماتیان بەگشتی مۆجوڵیشنمانەیە واتە گۆڕانکاری کاتی. پرسیارەکەوەی ئایا ئەم مەقامە بەڕاستی مەقامەیان تەنها تەحویلێکە، ئەوەی کە بە عەرەبی پێوتە تەحویلیان گۆڕانکاری کاتیان مۆجوڵیشن بە ئینگلیزی. وەڵامەکە ئەوەیە کە نەخێر لەبەرەوەی کە ئەمە ڕێڕەوێکی تایبەت بەخۆی هەیە و ئەو خاسیەتانی کە لە خێزانەکە هەیە کە بەیاتە ئەیپارێزێت لەگەڵ ئەوەشە توانای ئەوەی هەیە کە سەربەخۆ بێت پشت بەوە نەبەسرێت کە بێتەوە سەر مەقامی بەیات و ئەتوانێت ئەندامێک بێت کە پشت بە سەرچاوە سەرەکیەکەی نەبەستێت یعنی بۆیە توانین بڵێن کە ئەمە تەحویل نییە یان گۆڕانکاری کاتی نییە و خودی خۆشی خاوەنی کۆمەڵێک تەحویلە واتە جگە لەوەی کە خۆی تەحویل نییە بگرە خۆشی خاوەنی کۆمەڵێک گۆڕانکاری کاتیە یەکێک لەوانە گۆڕانکاریە بۆ پێنجینەیەکی یارسانی دۆ ڕێ می بیمۆڵ لەگەڵ فا سۆڵ بیمۆڵ ئەم گۆڕانکاریە هەیە دووەمیان بریتیە لە یاریکردن بە نۆتەکانی سی و سۆڵ ئەگەر ئێمە لە دۆ بیژەنین ینی ئەم یاریکردنە هەیە و دووبارەیەتە سەر نۆتەی بنەڕەت ئەمەش دوو نمونەیە یەکەم پێنجینە یارسانیەکە حەزەکەم گوێمان لێ بێت دەنگی سێم و ئەو یاریکردنە لە نێوان سی و سۆڵە دەنگی چوارەم بەسپاسەوە زۆر سپاس بگورن چۆن نەتوانین وەکو ئەجەندای ئەم پانێڵە بە ئەرشیفکردنە چۆن نەتوانین ئەم مەقامە بە ئەرشیف بکەین بە دڵنیاییەوە هەموو بابەتێکی مۆسیقا ئەتوانم بڵێم تەنها پرسێکی تیۆری نییە چونکە خۆی پرۆسەیەکە پرۆسێکی پراکتیکیە میوزیک و بۆی کە بەیاددۆریان لە هەوڵێکی تاکە کەسیەوە بکەین بە ئەندامێکی سەربەخۆی خێزانی بەیاد و ئەرشیفی بکەین لە ناو میوزیکی کوردیا پێویستمان بە چەند هەنگاوێکە ئەم هەنگاوانە بە پشتبەستن بە کۆمەڵێک لێکۆڵینەوە ئەو پشتم پێبەستووە و بەکارم هێناوە یەکێک لەوانە ئەوەیە کە لەلایەن میوزیسیانەکان و گۆرانی بێژەکانەوە بەکار بێت ینی خۆیان بە خاوەنی ئەم مەقامە بزانن ئەوە زۆر گرنگە کە گۆرانی لەسەر دروست بکەن لە ڕێگەی ئەوە ئەتوانی شەرعیت بین بە مەقامە ڕووی پراکتیکیەوە
گەشتیار ببوورە کاتەکە تەواو ئەگەر لە یەک خولێک بتوانیت خۆی بکەیتەوە
پێم وایە بەس ئەمە ماوە دوایەوە گوێبیستی یەک نمونەی بچووکە بین و ئەگەر بتوانین زۆر باشە گرنگیەکەی لەوایە کە ئەتوانین لە پلاتفۆرمە جیهانیەکانیش بڵاوی بکەینەوە و هەروەها تۆماری بکەین و بە بەڵگەنامەی بکەین نۆتەی لەسەر بنووسینەوە و هەروەها لە شوێنە پەیمانگە و زانکۆکانیشدا بوترێتەوە و بیناسێنین و هەروەها حەزەکەم ئاماژە بکەم وەکو یەکەم جار دووبارە ئاماژەی پێیەکەمەوە ئەم پانێڵە کورتکراوێکی لێکۆڵینەوەکەمە و هیچ بانگەشەیەک کە لە لێکۆڵینەوەکەما کرابێت سەرچاوێکی ئەکادیمی بۆ هێنراوەتەوە بۆی کە زیاتر جێی باوەڕ بێت و ئەتوانین کە ببینە یەکەم نەتەوە کە خاوەنی ئەم مەقامە بین لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوینە ئەمەش لیستی سەرچاوەکانە هەر کەسێک پێی خۆشە ئەتوانێت وێنەی بگرێت بۆی کە لیترچەرەکان دواتر چێک بکاتەوە لای خۆی یەک بەشی بچووک ماوە لە کۆتاییە نمونەیەکە لە ئەلبومەکەم کە لەسەر بەدۆریانە بەداخەوە کە نەمتوانێت لە ئێستا تەواوی بکەم هیوادارم کە بتوانم بە زووترین کات سپۆنسەرێکی بۆ بدۆزمەوە ئەمەش گۆرانی فەلەکە بەشێکی کورتێتی مقام بگورە
ئەمان بۆچی چەند ساڵە لەگەڵ من وەبەکینی ئەی فەلەک ئەی فەلەک هێندە بۆ دەرحەق بە من ونأميني أي فلك أي فلك أي فلك أي فلك أي فلك بۆچی چەند ساڵە لەگەڵ من وەبەکینی أي فلك أي فلك أي فلك أي فلك أي فلك حسرة وداوخ وغم هين كرمة يا روهم رفيق حسرة وداخ وغمر هين كرمة يار وهم رفيق صد زامد خستو مجاورقي بربريني أي فلك أي فلك أي فلك